The fork hit the floor before anyone understood why. It landed with a sharp, clean ring against the tile, the kind of sound that cuts through restaurant noise and makes 3 tables go quiet at once. The little girl who dropped it did not look down. She did not apologize. She did not move. She sat perfectly still in her pale blue church dress, her dark almond-shaped eyes locked across the crowded dining room of a small roadside restaurant on the edge of Savannah, Georgia, where the rain outside was falling in slow, heavy sheets and the ceiling fans above were turning like they had somewhere to be. Her name was Soo-yeon Whitmore, 11 years old, half Korean, half something she had never been told, smart enough to know when adults were hiding things, old enough to feel the shape of a lie even when she couldn't name it. She gripped the edge of the table. Across the room, a black waitress in a white apron was moving between tables with a pitcher of sweet tea, refilling glasses with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She had high cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that tilted upward at the corners the same way Soo-yeon's did, not a little. Exactly. Soo-yeon stared. The man beside her was named Kwon Ji-ho. He was 42 years old, broad shoulders, a face carved from discipline and expensive silence. In another city, in another world, men feared him. He ran one of the most quietly powerful Korean-American private acquisition firms on the East Coast, a business whose clean corporate name sat on top of older, darker money that nobody asked about directly. He wore no rings. He owned 3 properties. He had 1 child. He was studying the menu when his daughter's voice reached him. "Appa." He looked up. "Why does that waitress look exactly like me?" The menu slipped from his fingers. He turned slowly enough to look casual, slowly enough to buy himself 2 seconds. And he followed his daughter's gaze across the room. The waitress had not noticed yet. She was laughing softly at something an elderly man at table 7 had said, one hand resting on her hip. The pitcher tilted easy in her grip. She was maybe 33, 34. Her skin was a warm, deep brown. Her cheekbones were absurdly familiar. Ji-ho's throat tightened. He had not seen that face in 10 years. Not that face, but one very close to it. One that had stood under the magnolia trees outside a Charleston museum and told him she loved him. One that had cried without sound when he failed her in every way a person can fail another person without ever raising a hand. "She just has similar features, Soo-yeon," he said, and he heard immediately how hollow it sounded. His daughter tilted her head the way she always did when she knew she was being lied to. "Similar isn't the same as exact, Appa." She was 11. She said things like that. The waitress finally looked up, maybe feeling the weight of being watched, and her eyes met Soo-yeon's from across the room. The pitcher in her hand wobbled. Just barely. Just enough for the sweet tea to ripple against the glass walls of the pitcher like something disturbed deep underwater. Her name tag said, Marianne Brooks. She recovered quickly, smiled at the child, looked away, walked toward the kitchen with the particular controlled pace of someone trying not to run. Ji-ho watched her go. Brooks. The name moved through him like cold water through stone. He knew that name. He had tried for years not to know it. He had filed it under things that could not be changed, under decisions made by people with more power than guilt. But a name like Brooks does not stay filed. It surfaces. It waits. And tonight, in a rain-soaked restaurant in Savannah, Georgia. It had surfaced in the face of a 30-something waitress who looked so much like his 11-year-old daughter that a child with no context, no history, no knowledge of what happened in Charleston a decade ago had dropped her fork. Suyan was still watching the kitchen door. "Appa," she said quietly. "Do you know her?" "No," he said. It was the fastest lie he had ever told. And his daughter, his brilliant, watching, too perceptive daughter, turned and looked at him with eyes that held something older than 11 years. Something patient. Something that said, "I will wait, but I will find out." Jiho reached down and picked up her fork from the floor. He placed it on the table. He signaled for a replacement. He did everything a normal father does at a normal dinner in a normal restaurant. He smiled at her. He asked what she wanted to eat. But inside, every careful wall he had spent 10 years building was beginning to tremble. Because the truth has a heartbeat. And tonight, it had used an 11-year-old girl's voice. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let's go back, all the way back to Charleston. Because nothing that happened in that restaurant tonight makes sense until you understand what happened 10 years ago. Under the magnolia trees, between a man running from his own blood and a woman who never got to keep her child. 10 years earlier, Charleston, South Carolina wore its beauty the way old money always does. Gracefully, quietly, and with full awareness that you are looking. The city in late spring smelled of salt water and gardenia. The old plantation homes along the Battery had been converted into law offices and bed and breakfasts, their white columns gleaming in the afternoon heat. Horse-drawn carriages carried tourists past Rainbow Row. Church bells rang on the quarter hour. Everything on the surface was soft and unhurried. Kwon Jiho had arrived in Charleston 18 months earlier on Itepod Vankernaon's house, 31 years old, to oversee the acquisition of a historic waterfront property on behalf of a consortium his family's sole-based holding company had quietly financed for 2 decades. On paper, he was a real estate strategist. In practice, he was the man his family sent when something needed to be handled without noise. He was excellent at it. He spoke 4 languages. He had never raised his voice in a boardroom. He had a way of making people feel understood, right up until the moment they realized they had agreed to something they hadn't intended to. He was precise, measured, unemotional in all the ways his father had trained him to be. He was also, underneath all of that, profoundly lonely in a way he had never said out loud to owe anyone. He met Adeze Effiong on a Thursday afternoon in April. She was leading a small walking tour through the old Slave Mart Museum. 5 tourists, a clipboard, and a voice that did not apologize for the weight of what it was saying. She was 26. Born in Calabar, in Cross River State, Nigeria, and raised in Atlanta from the age of 8 after her mother immigrated on a teaching scholarship. She had her mother's height and her grandmother's face. The sharp, high cheekbones of the Ifik people. Eyes that tilted slightly upward at the outer corners, a jaw that was both elegant and immovable. She was a doctoral student in African diaspora studies at the College of Charleston. The museum guide work was part-time, part passion. Ji-ho was not on the tour. He had simply walked in off the street because the rain had started suddenly, and the museum's door was the nearest one. He stood near the back and listened. She was in the middle of explaining the paper records, the manifests, the receipts, the cold accounting language used to document human beings. When she paused and looked directly at him, "You look like you have a question," she said in front of everyone. He was not a man who got caught off guard. "Do," he said. "What is it?" "How do you do this every day?" he asked. "Carry all of this?" The tourists turned to look at him. She studied him for a moment, not hostile, not charmed, measuring. "The same way anyone carries history," she said. "You don't put it down. You just learn which hand to hold it in." She moved on with the tour. He waited outside when it ended. She came out 40 minutes later and found him still there, standing in the rain without an umbrella like a man who had not planned any further than the moment. "Still here?" she said. "Still here," he said. They had coffee, then dinner, then a second dinner 3 days later, then a walk along the Battery at 11 o'clock at night, their voices low, the harbor black and glittering beside them. She did not ask how much money he had. She did not seem interested in his family name or his firm's portfolio. She asked what he believed in. She asked what he was afraid of. She asked whether he had ever cried as an adult and whether he thought that mattered. He answered all 3 questions more honestly than he had answered anything in years. And somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd month, Ji-ho, who had been trained since boyhood to see relationships as alliances and emotion as liability, fell completely and helplessly in love with Ade's Effiong. He told himself it could work. He told himself his family would adjust. He told himself that his father's silence on the subject meant tolerance, and that tolerance could become acceptance if he was patient. But the Kwan family was not in the business of patience with things they did not approve. His mother called from Seoul in the 4th month. The conversation was short. Her voice was warm and surgical at the same time. "Ji-ho," she said, "you are in Charleston to close a deal, not to open a life." "I know what I'm doing," he said. "I hope so," she said, "because what you are doing reflects on everyone who carries our name." He did not tell Adais about the call. He told himself he was protecting her. That was the first lie. And like most first lies, it felt almost like a kindness. By the 5th month, they were spending 4 nights a week together. She was reading her dissertation chapters to him in bed. He was learning to cook the jollof rice recipe her mother had sent from Atlanta, burning it twice, getting it right on the 3rd attempt. She laughed at him in the kitchen. He thought, standing there with a wooden spoon and smelling faintly of tomato paste, I would burn it 100 more times just to hear that. And then came the evening in early December, under the magnolia trees outside the museum where they had first spoken. Adais was quiet as they walked. She had been quiet all evening. He noticed but did not push. She stopped under the largest tree. She turned to face him. "Ji-ho," she said, "I'm pregnant." The magnolia branches held the cold night air above them. He looked at her face, open, terrified, quietly hopeful, and for one long moment he felt something pure and enormous rise in his chest. And then, just below it, something old and trained, and Kwan moved. He calculated. He did not say the wrong thing immediately. That was the cruelest part of what followed. He pulled her close first. He held her under those magnolia trees in the December cold. And for a few minutes, he let himself simply feel the weight of what she had just said. The terrifying, enormous possibility of it. A baby, he whispered into her hair. A baby, she confirmed, her voice steadier than her hands. He held her longer than was necessary, if the thought behind his eyes had already turned dark. But the thought had not turned dark yet. It was still fighting. It was still trying to find a version of events in which he was brave enough to be the man she deserved. He was not in the end that man. Not yet. Not then. Over the following weeks, Jiho entered a kind of private purgatory that nobody saw because he was too skilled at presenting a clean exterior. He called his family attorney in Seoul on a Tuesday at 6 a.m. and described the situation without naming Adeze, speaking about it like a business complication. He sat through 2 calls with his father, a man whose disapproval arrived not in shouts, but in silences longer than oceans, and felt the familiar, horrible weight of being a Kwan son before he was anything else. His father never said, "End it." He said, "Handle it correctly." In the Kwan vocabulary, those 2 phrases meant the same thing. Meanwhile, Adeze was carrying their child, and carrying also the growing awareness that something in Jiho had shifted. She was not a woman who accepted vagueness without naming it. "You're somewhere else," she told him one evening. She was grading student papers at his kitchen table, reading glasses on, a cup of bush tea cooling beside her laptop. She said it without looking up, just stated it, the way she always stated things that were true. "I'm right here," he said. "Jiho." She set her pen down, looked at him fully. "You are the worst liar I have ever met. And I say that as a compliment, because it means you are not practiced enough to be comfortable with it. So don't practice on me." "What is happening?" He sat across from her. He told her about his family's opposition. He told her about his father. He did not tell her about the attorney or the things that had been discussed in those early morning calls. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "So, your family doesn't want this," she said. "They don't understand. That isn't what I asked." Her voice was level. "Your family doesn't want this. Your family doesn't want me, and they don't want this child. Yes or no?" He looked at the table. "Yes," he said quietly. She nodded slowly. Once. The way a person nods when they have suspected something for a while and have just been handed the confirmation. "And what do you want?" she asked. He looked up at her. And the tragedy of Kwan Jiho, the real, irreducible tragedy, was that the answer in that moment was honest. He wanted her. He wanted the child. He wanted to be the kind of man who turned his back on legacy and chose love with both hands. He just did not know how to be that man yet. "I want to fix this," he said. "I need a little time to fix this." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Something that was not quite trust, and not quite its absence. Something careful. "You have until I show," she said. "After that, fixing becomes somebody else's project." He nodded. He took her hand. He meant everything in the gesture. He then proceeded to do almost nothing right. His mother arrived in Charleston in February, unannounced, the way the Kwan family always made their most significant moves. Without warning, without room for preparation. She was 61 years old, immaculately dressed. And she looked at Ji-ho over dinner at a restaurant he would never be able to enter again without nausea, and said, very quietly, "We have made arrangements. The girl will be well provided for. The child will be placed with a good family. This does not have to be ugly." Ji-ho set his fork down. "No," he said. It was the first time in 31 years he had said that word to his mother at a dinner table. She looked at him the way people look at a known equation that has produced an unexpected result. "Think carefully," she said. "I don't need to think carefully." I said no. She folded her napkin. She said she would be in Charleston for 3 more days. She said she hoped he would use the time wisely. She said she loved him in the particular Kwan way, as a statement of fact, not an offer of comfort. She left. Ji-ho went directly to Adai's apartment. She wasn't there. He called. No answer. He texted. Silence. He stood outside her building in the February cold for 45 minutes before her neighbor, a retired teacher who had always liked Adai, opened a window and told him, gently but clearly, that Adai had left with a bag 2 hours earlier. She had not said where she was going. She had not left a note for him. Only later, much later, would Ji-ho understand what had actually happened in those 2 hours. Only later would he understand that his mother's arrangements had not waited for his refusal to be processed and reconsidered. They had already been set in motion before that dinner. The woman he loved was not running from him. She had been cornered. And what happened next was not something the Kwan family would ever put in writing. Ade's Effiong did not disappear the way women in the stories disappear. Quietly, without resistance, folding themselves into the narrative convenience of a man's guilt. She fought. That has to be said first, and said clearly, because the truth of what happened to her in the weeks after she left Charleston deserves more than the soft language of "she was gone." She went to Atlanta. To her mother, Mama Grace, a woman who had raised 2 daughters across 2 continents on a teacher's salary, and the kind of faith that did not ask permission. Adai arrived at that small house in Decatur, Georgia, in the 2nd week of February, 6 months pregnant, with 1 bag and a silence that frightened her mother more than any explanation would have. "Talk to me," Mama Grace said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. Adai told her everything: the relationship, the pregnancy, Ji-ho's family, the woman who had appeared in Charleston like a closing door. What she did not yet know, what she had no way of knowing, was that 2 days before she left Charleston, a woman from a private legal firm in Atlanta had visited her doctoral advisor at the College of Charleston with paperwork suggesting that Adai had formally withdrawn from her program. The paperwork was forged. Her advisor, an overworked man who processed too much paper, had signed an acknowledgement without verifying her directly. Her university email was quietly deactivated. Her stipend payments were redirected to a suspended account. The Kwan family's attorney had been thorough enough that the walls around Adai's began to close in ways she could not yet see or name. In Atlanta, the pressure arrived differently. A man appeared at Mama Grace's door one afternoon while Adai's was at a prenatal appointment. He was polite. He carried documents. He explained, with the measured calm of someone who had said these things before. that a generous settlement had been prepared for Adese Efyong, a sum that would clear her student debt, fund her mother's retirement, and establish a trust for any future children she might have. In exchange, she would sign over custody of the unborn child to a private adoption intermediary. She would agree to a non-contact clause. She would receive, in written form, the understanding that the Kwan family would ensure she faced no further interference in her life. Mama Grace had heard the man out. Then she had opened the door and stood beside it without a word until he left. When Adese came home, her mother was sitting at the kitchen table with the documents in front of her, untouched. "They came," Mama Grace said. Adese looked at the papers. She sat down. She read them without expression. "I'm not signing anything," she said. "I know," said Mama Grace. They hired a legal aid attorney the next week, a young woman named Priscilla Owusu, fresh from Emory Law, who worked from a shared office in Midtown and took the case because something about it made her angry in a professional and useful way. Priscilla was good. She was also young and under-resourced against what she did not yet know she was up against. Adese went into labor 6 weeks later, early, because her blood pressure had been climbing for 2 weeks, and her body had decided it had carried enough for long enough. The birth was fast and frightening, and then suddenly, overwhelmingly beautiful. A girl, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, dark hair, the high cheekbones of the Afik women, and eyes, even in that first hour, even blinking against the hospital light, that tilted upward at the corners in a way that was unmistakably, heartbreakingly Korean. Adezu held her for 45 minutes. She named her Nena, my father's mother in Igbo, a name that carries the weight of the women who came before. Then Mama Grace collapsed in the hospital corridor. A stroke, sudden, severe. The next 6 hours moved in a terrible blur. Adese, still bleeding, still healing, was transferred to a waiting room while her mother was rushed into emergency surgery. A social worker appeared, then a hospital administrator, then a woman from a private family services agency who said she was there to help with temporary placement given the circumstances. Adese, exhausted and terrified, and alone in a hallway outside her mother's surgery, was handed papers and told they were for temporary care authorization. She was told she could revoke them the moment her mother stabilized. She was told her signature just meant the baby would be safe, while she was unable to provide direct care. She signed. She should not have signed. She would understand that only later. By the time Mama Grace came out of surgery 14 hours later, diminished but alive, the baby was gone, and the papers Adese had signed were not temporary care authorization. They were full surrender of parental rights. Priscilla Owusu spent 4 months trying to unravel it. She found inconsistencies. She filed motions. She wrote letters. She was met at every turn by a wall of documentation that had been prepared with resources far exceeding what any young legal aid attorney could match. The adoption, by the time she penetrated far enough to see its shape, was closed. Final. Sealed. The baby, she was told, had been placed with a family. She was not told which one. Adese was told eventually, by the agency in a formal letter written in the bloodless language of institutional sympathy, that her daughter had not survived a complication in the first weeks of placement. She was told her daughter was dead. She believed it because the alternative That a family with enough money and enough cruelty could manufacture an infant's death on paper was too monstrous to hold. She held a private funeral with her mother and her sister Marianne. She buried an empty space in the ground, and she went quiet. Ji-ho, in Charleston, was told the adoption had been completed. He was told the mother had signed willingly. He was told a healthy baby girl had been placed with the Kwan family's private arrangement, and that he could raise her as his own. A week later, he held Soo-yeon for the first time. She stared up at him with her mother's eyes, and he chose to believe the story he had been given, because it was easier than the truth. If you're still watching up to this point, type "I'm still here" in the comment section, because what is coming next changes everything. Back in the restaurant in Savannah, Soo-yeon had not moved on. That was the thing about her. She was her mother's daughter in ways that neither she nor Ji-ho yet understood. She did not release a question simply because a conversation had moved past it. She filed it. She returned to it. She pressed. She watched the kitchen door where Marianne Brooks had disappeared. "I want to ask her something," Soo-yeon said. "Eat your food," Ji-ho said. "Appa." Soo-yeon. She picked up her fork, the replacement fork, and held it without using it. She was looking at him now, not the kitchen, looking at him the way she sometimes did when she was assembling a case. "You made a face," she said. "When?" She walked away. "You made a face like you recognized someone." "I was thinking about something else." "You always say that when you don't want to answer." He said nothing. "Why don't I look like grandmother?" she said, pivoting without warning the way 11-year-olds do when they're actually very old inside. "She has shown me pictures of you when you were young and you looked Korean. I look different. My face is different. You always say it's because of recessive genes. But I looked up recessive genes, Appa." He set down his chopsticks. "And?" he said, very carefully. "And it doesn't work the way you explained it," she said. "Not like this. Not this different." He looked at his daughter, 11 years old, reading genetic biology to build an argument in a restaurant in Georgia. And he felt something in his chest give way by a centimeter. Not collapse, just shift. "We'll talk about this at home," he said. "We've said that for 3 years," she said. He had no answer for that. Because she was right. Every conversation about her appearance, about the absence of a mother, about the sealed box he kept on the top shelf of the subject, had ended with, "We'll talk about this at home." They never had. Marianne came back out of the kitchen. She was carrying plates for another table, but her route took her close. Close enough that Soo-yeon, who had been watching that kitchen door for 20 minutes, simply spoke. "Excuse me." Marianne stopped. She looked down at Soo-yeon. Up close, in the warm light of the restaurant, the resemblance was not subtle. It was the kind of resemblance that doesn't require a second glance. It hits immediately and sits there. Marianne's jaw tightened by a fraction. "Can I help you, sweetheart?" she said. Her voice was careful, professional. "Do you have family in Charleston?" Soo-yeon asked. A plate nearly slipped. Marianne caught it. "Sorry, honey, I have a table waiting. I need to..." "I'm sorry to bother you," Soo-yeon said, and the maturity in her voice was startling. I think I know someone who looks like you. I just wondered." Marianne looked at Ji-ho for the first time directly. It lasted 1 second, the kind of second that contains an entire history. "Enjoy your dinner," she said, and moved away. Ji-ho stood up. He said quietly to Soo-yeon, "Stay here. Order dessert if the server comes. I'll be right back." "Appa." "Stay here." He followed Marianne. He caught her near the server station at the back of the restaurant, away from most of the tables. She had set the plates down. She was gripping the edge of the counter with both hands, facing away from him. "Marianne Brooks," he said quietly. She turned around. Her eyes were filled. She hadn't allowed herself to cry. She was too controlled for that, the same as her sister. But everything was there, right at the surface. "You need to leave," she said. "I need to talk to you. I know who you are." Her voice was barely above a whisper. It was shaking. "I have known who you are since you walked in this restaurant. And I need you to take that child and go, because I cannot—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I cannot stand here and look at her." "She's a Daisy's," he said. The name landed like a stone in still water. Marianne closed her eyes. "I know she's a Daisy's," she said. "I knew the second I saw her. She has my sister's cheekbones. She has my grandmother's eyes." She opened her own eyes. They were angry now, the grief pushed back and replaced with something harder. "She also has your face around the jaw. And she is sitting in my restaurant asking me if I have family in Charleston, and she doesn't know. She doesn't know a single thing, does she?" "No," Ji-ho said. What was she told? Silence. What was she told? Marianne said again, her voice dropping lower and going sharper at the same time. "That her mother passed away," he said. "When she was an infant." Marianne stared at him. For a long moment, she simply stared. "My sister," she said slowly, "spent 3 years trying to find out what happened to her daughter. She hired 2 investigators. She wrote letters to the state adoption office that were never answered. She lit a candle for her baby every December." A pause. "She thinks Nena is dead. Your family told her her baby died." The word Nena hit Ji-ho like something physical. He had not known that name. He had not known what a Daisy had called her. Soo-yeon. They had named her Soo-yeon. But she had a first name, given in a hospital room in Atlanta, held for 45 minutes before the world rearranged itself. "Nena. Is she?" His voice broke slightly. He controlled it. "Is Ades alive?" Marianne looked at him for a long time. "Yes," she said. He drove to Birmingham 3 days later. He did not tell Soo-yeon where he was going. He told her he had a business matter. She looked at him over her breakfast bowl with the eyes of someone who had filed that lie alongside all the others and would return to it later. He drove alone. 8 hours from Savannah. He stopped once for gas and did not get out of the car for 15 minutes after filling the tank. Just sat in the parking lot of a BP station in rural Alabama watching trucks pass on the highway and trying to build a sentence that could carry the weight of what he needed to say. He could not build one. He drove the rest of the way in silence. Marianne had given him, against her own better instincts, an address. Not Adaise's home address, a public library branch in Birmingham's South Side neighborhood, where Adaise worked 4 days a week in the archives department. Marianne had made one thing clear before she gave it. "If you go there and make it worse," she said, "I will find a way to make your life very difficult. And I have a sister who survived your family, so you should believe me." He had believed her. The library was a converted Carnegie building. Red brick, tall windows, the kind of quiet that feels intentional rather than empty. He arrived at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. He stood outside for several minutes. A woman walking past with a stroller looked at him curiously. He probably looked like someone trying to remember how to breathe. He went inside. She was at a table near the back of the archive room, surrounded by document boxes, wearing reading glasses he had never seen her need before. Her head bent over something handwritten on aging paper. She had her hair natural now, close cropped. She was 36 years old. She looked like someone who had absorbed a great deal of difficulty and made it into composure. She felt him before she saw him. He would always believe that. She looked up slowly, the way you look up when something interrupts a silence you had accepted. And for 1 second, just one, her face was completely open. All the composed distance collapsed. He looked exactly like the woman standing under the magnolia tree in December, saying, "I'm pregnant," with her hands shaking and her eyes hopeful. Then it closed again. "Get out of my library," she said. "Daisy, I'm at work." Her voice was flat. "You do not come to my workplace." "I know. I'm sorry." He stopped 2 tables away. He did not move closer. "Please, 5 minutes. I have nothing to say to you." "I do," he said. "I have something to tell you that—" He stopped. The sentence was too enormous for the middle of a library archive room. He looked at her. "Daisy, your daughter is alive." She was very still. The document under her hands didn't move. The lights in the room didn't change. The distant sound of a child laughing somewhere in the children's section continued as though the world had not just been handed a different shape. "Don't," she said, barely audible. "She's alive. She's 11 years old. She's been with me. Her name is—" "Don't you dare," she said. The flatness was gone now. Something enormous was moving underneath. "Don't you come in here after 10 years and—" "She has your cheekbones," he said. "She has your eyes. She reads everything she can find. She asks questions until she gets real answers. She dropped her fork in a restaurant in Savannah 3 days ago because she saw your sister across the room and recognized her own face." Daisy put both hands flat on the table. Her breathing changed. "Marianne," she said quietly, understanding arriving in pieces. "Your sister gave me this address. She didn't want to. She did it anyway." Daisy stood up slowly. She walked to the narrow window that looked out onto the library's small garden. A rectangle of grass, a bench, 2 old oak trees. She stood with her back to him. "They told me she died," she said. "Emplacement. They sent a letter. There was language about a complication. There was a reference number." Her voice was perfectly controlled in the way that things are controlled when the only alternative is shattering. "I buried a child. We, my mother, Marianne and I. We sat Shiva for her in our own way. She stopped. "I know," he said. "I didn't know that until 3 days ago. I was told you signed willingly. I was told it was clean. I believed it because—" He stopped himself. "Because it was easier," she said. "Yes." She turned around. Her eyes were dry. That was almost harder to look at than if they hadn't been. "What do you want from me?" she said. "I want to know what to do," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know. I'm asking you because I have no right to decide this alone." She looked at him for a long time. "What is her name?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the last word. One crack, then controlled again. Suyan? He said. But he stopped. Then, she was born Nena. I didn't know that until 3 days ago. Something moved across Adese's face that he could not name. It was too layered. It was 10 years of grief and the sudden, violent reversal of a buried thing. It was the name she had given in a hospital room, coming back across a decade in the mouth of the man who had failed her. I don't want your apology, she said finally. I don't want your guilt. I don't want to be handed my daughter like a correction. She straightened. I want to know who she is. I want to know what she likes and what she's afraid of and whether she's happy. And I want to know that before I decide a single thing about what happens next. He nodded. There's something else, he said. She already suspects. She knows the story she's been given doesn't fit. She found your sister on her own. She will find her way to this, if we don't. She already knows, Adese said. Jiho froze. What? Marianne called her, Adese said quietly. She found your number through the firm. She called Suyan's cell phone last night and told her the outline, without the details, just enough. Jiho could not speak for a moment. What did Suyan say? He finally asked. Adese looked at him, and for the first time, something that was almost not hostile moved in her eyes. She asked if I wanted to meet her. The meeting was not dramatic in the way that people expect reunion stories to be dramatic. There were no camera crews, no arranged gestures, no careful choreography. Adese had refused all of that. Refused it in the tone she used when a thing was not up for discussion. And so what happened instead was the kind of quiet that is actually louder than noise. A botanical garden in Birmingham on a Saturday morning in October. The oaks were beginning to turn. The air was cool and still and smelled faintly of wet earth and chrysanthemums. Adese had arrived first. She sat on a wooden bench near the pond, her hands folded in her lap. Wearing a blue coat that Marianne had told her without being asked was the right color. Marianne was there too. A few benches. Back, close enough to matter. Far enough to give the space its proper dimensions. Jiho parked the car and walked with Suyan along the garden path. Suyan had been silent for most of the drive. That was unusual. She was a girl who filled silence with questions. That morning, she had asked only one, 2 miles from the garden. Is she angry? She said. Not at you? Jiho said. Is she angry at you? A pause. Yes, he said. Suyan considered this. Okay, she said, as though the honesty itself was a kind of relief. She saw Adese from the path before they reached the bench. She stopped. Jiho stopped beside her. Adese had looked up. She was too far away for her expression to be fully readable, but she was very still. The particular stillness of someone who is working hard to stay present in a moment that is almost too large to occupy. Suyan turned to her father. Can I go? She said. By myself? He looked at her. 11 years old. Church dress exchanged. Today, for jeans and a gray sweater. Hair down. Her mother's cheekbones and her grandmother's eyes, and something entirely her own in the set of her jaw. Yes, he said. She walked ahead. He stood on the path and watched his daughter close the distance between herself and a woman who had spent 10 years lighting candles for her. He did not go closer. He did not follow. For the first time in 11 years of being a father, he was not managing the outcome. He was simply present at the edge of something that did not belong to him. Soo-yeon reached the bench. She stood in front of a daze. They looked at each other. Really looked, the way people do when they are cataloging something they need to keep. And the morning held its breath around them. Adize's hands, folded in her lap, tightened slightly. Then Soo-yeon said, "You have my cheekbones." Adize made a sound, barely a sound, something between a laugh and a fracture. "Actually," she said, her voice just steady enough, "you have mine." Soo-yeon sat down on the bench beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. The way you sit next to someone you have already decided to trust. "Marianne told me a little," Soo-yeon said. "Not everything. She said you would tell me the rest." "I will," Adize said. "Whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now," said Soo-yeon. Adize looked at this 11-year-old who had dropped a fork in a Savannah restaurant and started dismantling a decade of silence with one question. She looked at her the way Mama Grace had looked at her children during the hard years, like the sight of them was both the wound and the medicine. "You were named Nena," Adize began, "before you were Soo-yeon. I named you Nena because it means my father's mother in our language. And she was a woman who never gave up on anything." A pause. "I held you for 45 minutes. I want you to know that, whatever you were told, whatever you weren't told. I held you for 45 minutes, and you were the most important thing that had ever happened to me." Soo-yeon looked at the pond. "I wasn't told anything," she said quietly. "That's the problem. Nothing." "I know." "Do you forgive him?" she asked, and it was clear who she meant. Adize was quiet for a moment. "That's a long road," she said. "I'm not at the end of it yet." "Me neither," said Soo-yeon. She reached out then, slowly, carefully, the way a child reaches for something they want very much and are also afraid of. And she put her hand over Adize's folded hands. Adize looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and held it. On the path behind them, Jiho stood alone and watched his daughter hold the hand of the woman he had failed and the world he had kept from them both. He did not cry the way men in stories cry, in cathartic, releasing torrents. He stood very still and felt the specific pain of a person who has understood, too late and too fully, the cost of choosing comfort over courage. He had gone to his mother 3 weeks earlier. That conversation had not been soft. She had received him in her soul sitting room with the composure of a woman who had never expected to answer for anything. He had told her what he knew. She had confirmed it, not in admission, but in the particular silence that is more honest than words. He had told her what would happen next, that Adize would be a part of Soo-yeon's life, that the sealed records would be challenged, that the law firm involved would be named. "You will destroy everything," she said. "I should have destroyed it 10 years ago," he said. When it mattered. He had left her sitting room and not looked back. The Kwan family's reputation did not collapse. Powerful things rarely do. But it cracked, quietly, in the way that old stone cracks when water finally finds its way through. And inside those cracks, something smaller and more honest had room to grow. Shared time, slow trust. Soo-yeon, spending weekends learning to cook jollof rice from Mama Grace, who had recovered enough from the stroke to stand at a stove and argue lovingly about the quantity of pepper. Adize driving to Savannah twice a month. Phone calls between a girl and a woman who were building a language between themselves. Not the language of mother and daughter yet. Something newer. Something without a name that fit perfectly, because they were making it themselves. Jiho was not forgiven. Not fully. Perhaps not ever, in all the ways that matter. But he was present, and he was honest. And he stopped choosing legacy over the people who had to live inside it. For a man who had spent his whole life managing outcomes, that was the hardest and most necessary thing he had ever done. Here is what this story knows, and what it asks you to sit with. Some people hide the truth because they are cruel. But more often, more dangerously often, people hide the truth because they are afraid, because they have been taught that what they come from matters more than what they choose. Because silence feels, in the short term, like mercy. But silence is not mercy. It is a debt. And it compounds. The truth does not die when you refuse to speak it. It lives in the shape of a child's face. It lives in the way a woman lights a candle every December for a daughter she was told she lost. It lives in a question asked in a roadside restaurant by an 11-year-old girl who had been given no language for her own reflection, and who found the answer anyway, because the truth had given her its heartbeat and trusted her to carry it home. She was named Nena before she was Su-yeon. Both names are true. That is where the healing starts. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. If this moved you, if it made you think about truth and silence, and the cost of the choices we make for other people without their knowledge, please like this video right now and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, click that button and join this community. Because every week we bring you stories that don't let you go easy. Stories that stay. Stories that matter. The next one is coming, and you do not want to miss it.